So good afternoon, and thank you for having us here in Helsinki. We noticed that there's still a little bit of winter. You haven't yet reached spring, but I think it's just around the corner. I wanted to start by just giving you perhaps three messages, and those will be sort of if you take away three messages from my presentation, that's already very good. So the first is that innovation is no longer an option. This is not something that we do because we think it's modern and it's exciting, and it's not an option. I think the minister has already explained why it's not an option because of the many pressures that you're under. And I don't need to tell these to you because you know them already in terms of the demographic changes, the budgetary pressures, the increasing competition. But how are we going to do that? And so then the second message is that innovation is not something that the other people do. So you can say, yes, we have to innovate, and someone is going to do it for me. So they can go in the corner and they will work on it, and then they will come back and they will give me a solution. No, it's something that we all have to work on. And then the third message, which I hope is the good news, is that you're not alone. This is something that all countries within the OECD, but also outside of the OECD, are facing. And so therefore, there are experiences, there is knowledge that you can tap into. So what I want to do is to start by explaining to you what the OECD is doing in this area, and then to tell you what are some of the lessons that we're starting to draw based on the experiences of many countries across the OECD. So I start with the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. In 2011, the Public Governance Committee, which is the group that decides on the work of the OECD in public governance, and especially in terms of what are the forward-looking issues, they said to us, please help us develop a way to share experiences in public sector innovation. Because if we don't do it, each civil servant in his or her office is not going to be able to look beyond the cubicle and decide and understand what needs to be done. We need some help. And so we began thinking, what are the resources that civil servants need? And in fact, we even did a business plan. The business plan said, if your minister comes to you and says, I need a solution in such and such an area, how many conferences would you need to go to? How many networks would you need to participate in to be able to know what is the state of the art in that area? And most people, that is quite time consuming. So how can we make this information available and to make it shareable at the public sector and to have access to the international practice? So we developed the Observatory for Public Sector Innovation. This platform is, at a very basic level, something very simple. It is a group of innovations which you can browse through and not copy and paste, but to inspire. Because if you go, anyone now can Google and say, I want the best practice in EID. I want the best practice in behavioral insights. That's available. But to talk to other civil servants, to say, this is how it's implemented. These are the problems that you're going to look around, to need to see around the corner. These are the skills that you're going to need to implement it. That's the part that is much more difficult to get. Because administrations are risk adverse, they don't necessarily want, everything needs to be a success by the time it goes to the international level. So how do you get that real information, and how do you go beyond the level of the insight to the level of the plan? How do I tailor this to my administration? So that's the first thing that we tried to do through this observatory. The second thing is then how do you create these communities of practice? Communities of innovators, international, who are working on similar questions, but that can have that discussion, that frank discussion. And then the third thing is, what lessons can we draw from this? What are the overarching research or understanding that we can take from looking at many, many different types of innovations? So we began by working with countries and working with user groups. So getting people into a room and saying, if you have to develop a new service, what would you do? What information would you need? How would you go about getting it? And that's how, it took us 2 years, but I think that we developed a very nice platform which we unveiled in Paris last year at our conference on public sector innovation in November of 2014. So I'm going to give you a little video to show you what this looks like, and then I'll explain some more.
The OECD is proud to present the Observatory of Public Sector Innovation, created to connect innovators and inspire more innovation in the public sector. The Observatory is your gateway to a library of innovation experiences from around the world and tailored to your needs. Today, the Observatory enables you to search, compare and browse through examples of innovations from across the world, find articles about public sector innovation, share your own experiences, and collaborate by interacting with users from across the world. Let's take a closer look at what you can do. You can search for innovations by level of government, sector, or stage that the innovation is in. You can type a keyword, and you can browse the map. Just hover over a country to see its innovations. When you have selected an innovation, browse through the various tabs to find more information. It is possible to print, download, and share the innovations through social media channels, or share your innovation with others via the online form. If you're a public official, you can comment on innovations and find out more about who is behind the innovation. Do you want to compare innovations? Select up to 3 innovations to see how different strategies have worked, or not. In the country profile space, you can learn about different public sector innovation policies and events in individual countries. Each country profile provides information on the country's activities, including a Focus On section that highlights recent programs or special events related to innovation. Want to hear and be heard by the innovators community? Visit the Innovation blog to read and comment on posts by experts and send us your own contributions to be featured in the blog. But the Observatory is not only about accessing content, it is also a place where innovators meet to share their views, discuss, and work together. For example, you can connect with other innovators by joining discussions, asking questions, and launching your own discussions. If you have a specific piece of work or project that you would like to work on with others, then you create your own project space. We hope to see you soon online at the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation.
So as you can see, we're quite proud of this platform. But this is not something that is an OECD product. This is something that belongs to all of our member countries. And so one of the things that we want to do is to talk to people like yourselves to understand how we can get additional people to use this observatory. There we go. So this slide gives you a taste of some of the 160 innovations that we have on the observatory for the moment. You see that there's a range. Many of the innovations really have to look at the interface between the public administration and the citizens. So looking at examples of co-creation, examples of greater transparency, how is government becoming more open and therefore driving innovation in that way. You also see examples about how service delivery is becoming more effective and efficient, both through the use of digital channels for services, but also through customer relations management and other ways of becoming closer and better understanding the needs of the citizen. We also have examples of the internal operations within the public administration, such as one-stop shops for human resource management, or through the use of improved use of office space. I think this is one thing that many countries are wrestling with. I think it's a good example. The Belgian government had begun to do work on how do you not just create open space plans, but how do you communicate those changes, and how do you link that in with a telework policy and with the IT infrastructure to support that. It was actually at one of the meetings when we were discussing this innovation that the Korean government said, that's very interesting, we want to do the same thing. And they began to talk with one another to share what those experiences were. So this is something where just getting the idea is the starting point, but it's the beginning of that conversation. And what we also are trying to collect is not just service innovations, but also how governments are working internally to become more innovative in order to deal with very complex and multifaceted problems. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But for the moment, our focus has really been on the central administration. And our next step is going to be to open this up to the subnational government, because we know that that is where the vast majority of services to citizens are given. And so therefore, looking at that interface between central government, subnational government is going to be critical for the success of this observatory. In terms of how we use the observatory to work together and to do co-creation, I think a good example is the Public Sector Innovation Network of Australia. This was just in November when the Ministry of Industry in Australia, who is responsible for the innovation portfolio, came. They said, you know, we have this government-wide network of about 2,000 people, and we send emails to each other, and we share what we're doing, but we haven't systematized this, and we don't have a place where we can collect the experiences that we're sharing. Said, would you mind putting this onto the OPSI website? So we said, yes, this is exactly what the purpose of the OECD is here for. So we've created a closed space within the OPSI where 2,000 people can have access, and there's a collaborative space where up to 50 people can work together to define problems, collect information, collect data, and to work out solutions specifically for the Australian public sector. And we're hoping that we can do this for other countries as well. So for the moment, we only began to go public in November, so it's still early days for us. You can see that we have 160 odd innovations from 27 countries, coming from policy practitioners and experts, and then also that this community is growing. And I think a very important thing to note here is that more than half of the people who come to the observatory come back again. And so they see that there is value in using this observatory. Anyone can go on and browse, but you need to register in order to leave comments and to use the collaborative elements. So I encourage all of you, after the end of today, take a look at the OPSI, see what you can, see what's available on it. Think about sharing some of your own experiences. There is a page to submit innovations with a questionnaire about 12 pages long. And then please participate and join in some of the online discussions and consider the creation of your own online communities, be those at the sectoral level, at a municipal or regional level, because that's one of the offerings that we would like to propose to all of you. So from these experiences, we've begun to gather what we see are some of the critical ideas that countries need to take into account in order to spread public sector innovation. So I've already said, you're not alone, but how are you going to be able to work in ways which encompass all of the public administration? And we see that in many of our countries, there are little pockets of innovation, and they're not necessarily connecting up together. And more importantly, the innovations work because they're in a laboratory setting or they're in some type of safe environment. And as soon as they go up to the real public administration, they fail. So one of the biggest problems is not innovation in and of itself. I think that public or civil servants are quite innovative. The problem is one of scaling up. How do we create the conditions for those innovations to succeed? And really, at the OECD, we are not simply focusing on innovation. We're focusing on better public sector outcomes. And that's the linkage that we're looking to make. So at our conference in November of 2014, we identified 4 areas which governments need to focus on. I don't think that these are earth-shattering, but I think they're quite profound in that if we want innovations to benefit the public administration and to benefit citizens, we have to look at how the public administration is working in the first place and where those barriers are for innovative ways of working to scale up. We have to look at what are the rules and the processes which are creating bottlenecks for joined up ways of working, for collaboration, for taking of risk. We have to look at what are the issues with regard to our public sector workforce, either in terms of the skills that are needed, but also of the culture of the public administration that allows people to go the extra mile, to give of themselves to improve what they do, and not simply just to do what is being asked of them. And finally, we need to think about what is the knowledge that's available and to think of that as a resource for the public administration. We're starting to see this happening in terms of the open data movement, where this is no longer a resource to be hoarded by individual departments of government, but it's something that belongs to people, and so therefore that should be used for their benefit. So I'm going to walk through each of those, and I try to go a little bit quicker because I know we don't have so much time. In terms of ways of working, we know that very complex policy problems require whole of government ways of thinking. This means drawing across the expertise of a broad range of actors, introducing new ways of working and problem solving, and also of introducing flexibility in terms of the staffing system and leadership responsibilities. And increasingly, we realize that the public administration cannot do it on its own. And this is not just about outsourcing or privatizing. It's really about co-creation in new ways where we're bringing in the expertise of the private sector and of citizens and civil society. So we've seen that laboratories, innovation labs, are one way of doing this. Why do they work? Why are they so successful in terms of coming up with new solutions? Because they bring new partners to the table who are not necessarily in dialogue with the public administration, because they bring in multiple partners, and because they also draw on different disciplines, not just on legal experts, but also people from the design community, anthropologists or ethnographers, people working in the data sciences. These are completely new approaches which allow us to attack traditional or new and arising social problems in a different way. And then finally, they create a dedicated space where we can take risks without the fear of being judged or being penalized. This is just a couple of examples of some of the laboratories that are out there, and you see that they exist both at the national level, for example, Mind Lab in Denmark, and then also at the subnational level, such as the 27th region, which is an association which works with the regional governments in France to develop innovation pilots. I'm going to skip through this a little bit. The second area I wanted to address is that of the processes and the regulations which prevent innovation from happening. So perhaps something works well in a laboratory setting. Now then when we try to scale it up to the public administration, what are our challenges? We see that sometimes rules and processes have an unintended effect that limit organizations' capacity to innovate. So oftentimes this has to do with actually very well-meaning reforms that we put in place, for example, of performance management, where people are rewarded for doing their job, they have a weak reward for going beyond doing their job, and they have a very strong penalty if they fail. So these incentives mean that without telling people that they cannot innovate, in fact, the message is that don't take the risk because the reward is not worth it. Instead, if we look at how do we remove some of those limits, in addition, sending messages which are telling people not just the formal or the written limits, but also the self-imposed limits, how can we create a new way in which people are more willing to take risks? Part of this is about simplification efforts to look at new approaches to assessing and managing risk and performance. It's also about increasing the flexibility by which we look at new ways to govern the behavior of public administration. And in part, over the last 20 years, the new public management has really led to a lot of contractual relationships within the public administration because we believe everything can be measured and everything can be rewarded. When in fact now there's a growing recognition that public sector values are very important in governing the behavior of the individual civil servants. And that in fact when you align the values of an organization with the values of the individual, that's when you have the greatest engagement in work, and that engagement in work is linked with both innovation and public sector productivity. So there's quite a bit of research which mainly comes from the private sector, which we're now starting to adapt into the public sector, which changes the ways in which we try to motivate and guide the performance of our staff. And then finally, looking at what are innovative approaches to problem solving, such as focusing on outcomes, adapting existing processes, and relying on collaborative and pilot systems to sort of circumvent the policy cycle and to make it tighter so that you don't wait until the 3-year project is finished to do the evaluation, but you do more piloting, take the incremental evaluations, and use that to adjust your thinking and your program developments. Some of these issues have to do with how we allocate resources within the public administration. This table shows what seems to us to be an increase in the amount of budget reallocations that require either parliamentary or Ministry of Finance or ex-ante approval between 2007 and 2012. I think there's a lot of reasons explaining this, including the fiscal crisis and including greater demands or a greater role on the Ministry of Finance to control some of the financial decision-making in the sector level. So in and of itself, I think that there's a lot of explanations for this. But what's underlying that is you can see there's a very, very small increase in ex post approvals, where you place greater confidence or trust in the sector ministries that they will reallocate funds in ways that support their mission and their program. And that ex ante, yes, there is control. Yes, there is accountability. But you do not wait and prevent them from acting beforehand. So we've had actually some very interesting discussions with our network of senior budget officials, where they say, oh, you're just preaching for greater budget flexibility. No, it's budget flexibility in a context of agreed upon performance outcomes. So as you can see, once again, none of these pieces work individually. They have to be part of a concerted overall vision of how to create a more innovative public administration. Then I have 2 more issues, and I'll finish up to give us time. The people issue is quite critical, because people is where innovation comes from. This has to do with the ability of the individual. So they say, I can do it. So there we have what are the skills that are necessary. And we can see that those skills are increasing quite rapidly in terms of skills of managing contracts, managing partners, working outside of the public administration, working outside of their individual stovepipes. Then there's the issue of the motivation, both intrinsic and extrinsic incentives to work in an innovative way. And we see that in OECD countries, 2/3 of OECD countries have introduced some type of performance pay as a way to try to increase incentives for performance. When in fact, at a more anecdotal level, we see that many of those systems end up being gamed. And so they do not have the impact that is desired in terms of improving overall performance. And in fact, some of the research that we've seen looking at individual countries showed that performance pay does not actually have an outcome on overall organizational performance. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, because I think performance pay starts a discussion between the managers and the employees about what the expectations of those employees are. And so that in and of itself is part of the creation of the culture. But let's not think of this in a very simple way, that if you simply say, I will give you additional money for meeting performance targets, that will automatically happen. Motivation is something much more complex, just as people are very complex. And then finally, what are the opportunities? How do we use work design and organization to create opportunities for people to take risks and to work in more innovative ways? We have a report that will actually be discussed in our public employment and management meeting in April, which looks at some of the innovative HRM practices that support innovation, including holistic HRM, learning networks, mobility programs, and awards and competitions, just some of the strategies that countries have used. And we also see that new types of working within the public administration require new forms of leadership. As you move from the left to the right, you see that the skills that we have in the public administration have moved from the specialist or method competence type skills towards more about activity and implementation competence, social communications competence, and personal competence. Personal competence means how do you have the skills to motivate and encourage people in your teams and to create the environment in which they can be more innovative. This has led to new forms of leadership. We have ethical leadership in terms of promoting the setting, or promoting and setting the example through people's own behavior. In terms of creating the work environment, which allows people to be productive in a sustainable way, in terms of transforming ways of thinking and being able to come up with new types of solutions. And then finally, in terms of displaying and inspiring loyalty and integrity. So as we see the public administration working more efficiently, smaller, more tightly knit, the ways in which we motivate that public administration is moving beyond simply the material rewards for performance to a much more complex set of incentives which have to do with values, have to do with workplace setting, have to do with leadership, and have to do with culture and the relationship between the people. So I want to close with how we can make knowledge more available across the public administration to support innovation. So sharing information to spread ideas and practices, I think that everyone understands that. But this also means leveraging new ways of gathering ideas, both from within the public administration and outside of the public administration. So the whole idea of crowdsourcing in order to get new ideas. Then bridging internal information needs and integrating new data into existing processes and learning. So we've now moved from first sort of an open data environment to now trying to understand how data can drive decision-making within public administrations. Whether that's to have better foresight and to use data to better anticipate the needs of the citizens, or else also to increase the level of transparency within the public administration so that we can start identifying where there are opportunities for greater synergies or to reduce duplication across the public administration. This chart shows a response by OECD countries to how open data is being used in their countries. And you can see that at the top, many of the traditional reasons for using open data appear, such as increasing transparency, creating economic value, increasing openness. If you look at the bottom, the areas of using open data that were cited much less often included facilitating citizens' participation in public debate, enabling service delivery from the private sector, and improving internal operations and collaboration. So there is an understanding that public sector information can help to improve the overall objectives of the public administration. But how can it be used to improve the governance of the public administration, both in terms of its relationship with the citizens and also in terms of how the management of the public administration as a whole can be informed by this data? And then finally, do countries have the right skills to inform, to turn information into knowledge? And actually, I have to admit that when we did this slide, I did not see where Finland is actually doing quite well. This is from our adult skills survey, the PIAC, which looks at whether adults in the workforce have problem-solving skills in technology-rich, complex environments. So we see that Finland actually outperforms just about every OECD country. This was done in 2010, and we'll be doing an update of it in 2017. Now, whether or not those people are the ones that are coming into the public administration, that's actually the question that we at the Public Governance Directorate want to look at. What are the specific needs of the public sector vis-a-vis the rest of the economy? But we see that just as with the economy as a whole, the types of skills which workers need are shifting quite rapidly. They involve both use of technology, but it's no longer just having an IT department. Now everyone has to understand open data, social media, and online service delivery. So that means the general profile of the public administration is changing as well. So I've tried to go through the whole realm of issues that we see, but I'll close by repeating, you don't have a choice to innovate. You have to do it yourself. You can't wait for someone else to do it, but you're not alone. And so we at the OECD are here to help you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I have two microphones, but I tried to handle. You certainly gave us a license to innovate, and we took it with us. Now we have about 5 minutes time to ask some questions from Edwin or comments. Yeah. One thing that I wrote here and what I have been thinking for quite a long time is that this is a huge challenge also to our performance management procedures and the things that what are the for what kind of things we set the targets and how we follow them and of course the rewarding also that you said, that what are the things that the incentives and the rewards that we really support this kind of culture and support people taking risks and not punish them and this kind of things. What do you think on a global perspective, which country is the most, how do you say, advanced in this sense, building up this kind of a innovative culture, working culture?
Well, at the end of January, we held an expert group meeting to look at what countries were doing to improve employee engagement. And this, I have to be honest with you, this is not an area that I myself had worked on, but we brought in a number of the experts, and I learned an incredible amount, which is that when you monitor the level of engagement of your employees, you have additional input into the management. So you can adjust your leadership, you can adjust the work environment, you can adjust all of these things in response to the messages that you're getting from the citizens. And the countries that are doing this, it started out really with the Anglo-Saxon countries, so it's Australia, Canada, the United States, and the UK. But now it's spreading. We see that the Dutch are doing it, the Flemish, the Belgian national government, as well as the Flemish government. The Estonians have started doing work in this area as well. So the issue perhaps is not to focus just on one thing, which is employee engagement, but to say, rather than just looking at performance, let's look at all of the features or the factors which are driving the willingness of our civil servants to work on behalf of the public administration.
Anybody? Yes, please, there.
I'm Helena Lehtimäki, I'm a journalist. I'd like to know what kind of impact you expect from this observatory in the coming years. And also, do you see some impact also in our collaboration with, for instance, developing countries?
That's a very interesting question. You know, there's been a lot of requests for the OECD to do an innovation award. And we've actually resisted it because that leads one to believe that there's a best practice in the entire world and everyone should do that. And I think that that's actually the antithesis of innovation, because innovation is actually very contextual and very locally bound. So that's why we talk very much about inspiring, but then people find their own solutions. So I'm not sure that we're going to be able to say, you know, this global change due to the OECD Observatory of Public Sector Innovation. I think our ambitions are much more modest. But that said, what we're finding is that we're getting very loyal return users to the observatory because there is a relationship of trust between the OECD and countries, because they say, this is our information. This is not something that's being packaged and sold by the private sector consulting firms or by the technology firms. So that's, I would much rather develop that relationship over the long term than to do something big and splashy. For the developing countries, we're actually getting a lot of demand to be part of the OPSI. And so first of all, I have a conversation with them. I say, are you doing this for the right reasons? Because we're not here to market what you're doing. And secondly, this contextual element, once again, means that before you even talk about what are the innovative things that you're doing in your country, let's talk about these working processes and skills and culture which underlies the ability of the more advanced countries to innovate. So we use the observatory to bring them in, but then we try to have a deeper discussion about what types of reforms are necessary to meet their ambitions.
Other comments or questions to Edwin? This morning we had a small group which Arja Terho had called together, and we were discussing how to get the best possible use of that platform of yours, and I think that one of the solutions or outcomes from that meeting was that we are going to continue of this kind of a networking public sector within the public sector organizations, this kind of a network that focuses on innovations, and of course it's important then to build a network of networks, because we have a lot of different kind of networks, and they are also connected to each other.
You know, not everyone was able to go to Paris for the OECD conference in November, but there were 400 people, and there was a woman who stood up. She said, "I work in the French university system. I'm a lecturer, and I understand that we're under incredible pressure, and I understand that we have to change the way we do things, and I want to. I really want to change it. But I'm just one person, you know, doing my work in my corner. I don't know how I can change the system. So if you want me to change my way of working, you have to plug me into something bigger." And I think that that's what we're talking about when we talk about networks of innovators. It's really empowering people who are willing to help but don't know how.
Get the critical mass
Exactly.
moving. Yeah. Thank you very much again,
Thank you.
Edwin.